Okay, we can get started. First, thank you all for taking the time to join us for the presentation. I know we're all dealing with a lot going on, kids running around, pets running around. It's not easy. So thank you. We're very grateful for you to find the time to join us here today. My name is Kenny Carberry. I'm the Manager of Clinical Development at Alira Health. And I have 3 colleagues today. They're going to help us go through the national supply shortage of COVID-19, what's causing it, what is its impact at the hospital and patient level, and what's going to be the solution. 3 speakers today, Dr. Giacomo Basadonna, Chief Medical Officer at Alira Health, Mary McNamara-Cullinane, the Senior Vice President of Regulatory at Alira Health, and our friend Doug Jones, who's the Vice President of U.S. Channel Sales at WellAir. We'll give each presenter a minute to do a more formal introduction before they speak. But here are the topics we'll be going over. Do we have enough equipment nationally to handle the coronavirus issue? What is the situation and how do we get to the shortage that we're experiencing? On the commercial side, what changes are we going to see in purchasing equipment going forward? And then what is the government's role, both in the supply chain and from an FDA perspective? What's being done and what will be done to help get new medication, equipment, et cetera, to help resolve the issue. Also, we'll be doing a Q&A at the end. So in the chat on the side of your screen, there is a question mark button that will allow you to type in a question in Q&A. So feel free to type in any questions you like, and we'll go over as many as we can following the presentations. So without further ado, Dr. Giacomo Basadonna is going to give a presentation on the hospital impact of the supply shortage. Giacomo?
Thank you, Kenny. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning and talking to you. I'm a practicing surgeon, and I've been a practicing surgeon here in the United States for over 20 years. I also have worked as part of my academic duties at NIH and NIAID under the direction, actually, of Dr. Fauci, that we all see on TV every night. And so there are many aspects of this pandemic that has been interesting to me. And one of the things that has been catching my interest is this concerning claim that the U.S. does not have enough beds to take care of the sick patients and enough supplies. For my part of the presentation, I'm going to cover the issue regarding hospital beds, ICU beds, and I'm going to start by looking at the bed capacity. So how many beds do we really have available in the U.S. to take care of sick people, generally speaking? And after that, we are going to look also at bed occupancy and to see really, in all honesty, how many beds are available and how can we increase the capacity if people get sick at a higher rate than we usually see. When it comes to bed capacity, I think the first statement that comes to mind is that if we compare ourselves to other countries around the world, we don't have even close the number of hospital beds that are necessary to face a pandemic like this one here. According to the Organization for the Economic Cooperation and Development, the U.S. has about 2.8 hospital beds per 1,000 people. And if we compare it to other countries, even Italy, that was probably hit the hardest recently, Italy has 2.2 beds per 1,000 people, China 4.3. And South Korea, which has been a very good example how to correctly face the pandemic, it seems like they did a good job since the very beginning, has actually a whopping 12.3 beds for every 1,000 people. So the question is, when we sit in front of the news and we see the governors, particularly of certain states, clearly desperate because they're facing the potential to have an enormous amount of patients all coming in at the same time and not enough beds. It comes, it begs for an answer. Now, obviously, my presentation cannot really cover all the issues that affect bed capacity and bed occupancy, but I think I want to present a couple I find them interesting. The first one that comes to mind is the necessity of a certificate of need, which is necessary to either open a new hospital or increase the bed capacity of any hospital. The certificate of need was created in 1964, and actually, ironically, was started in New York State, and after that, eventually went across the country. It was supported for some time by the federal government, and eventually the federal government moved away and kind of took a step back and decided not to necessarily endorse it anymore. Currently, 36 states and D.C. and Washington, D.C. regulate the entry or the expansion of healthcare facilities via the certificate of need. These laws require basically state government permission before a facility can expand, offer a new service, or purchase certain pieces of equipment, and obviously ventilators come to mind. And I think Doug will tell us more about that in the next presentation. I can attest I can certainly I've been a witness of if I'm an organ transplant surgeon, and if in the state of Connecticut where I live, a hospital decides to offer a new service of kidney transplantation, they have the possibility, they have the beds, they have the doctors and nurses to do it. Most likely will not require a certificate, will not receive a certificate of need for reasons that I'm going to explain in a minute. In 28 states, hospitals must get the regulator's permission before they can even add beds. And the bed space in nursing homes, which have been hit very hard by the virus, and long-term care facilities are also regulated by the same laws. These laws were created, if you go back and look, for two purposes. One was to keep the cost of health care low, and one was to increase the availability of services to the poor. The idea was that if more and more hospitals are going to be created, or too many beds are going to be added, the cost of health care is going to go up. Secondly, by constricting the number of beds, the number of facilities, state governments basically had the opportunity to say, okay, we allow you to be in the market, we allow you to be active, but at the same time, you have to promise us that you will devote part of this care to charity, basically, to helping the poor and the folks that cannot afford. This was the idea at the beginning. It has been calculated, and there has been several studies, one in particular is very, very good, that came out from Mason University, that these laws account for approximately 131 fewer beds every 100,000 people in the United States. These laws also have accounted for a decrease in MRI services every 500,000 people, between 1 and 2 hospitals. So in other words, there are less MRI services available because of the regulators and because of the controls. This study that was recently done analyzed the effect of these laws in different states. And I picked Michigan as an example, not that I have anything against Michigan, but if you look at the state of Michigan, with a population of about $10 million, it has been calculated that because of certificate of need and the regulation coming from the state has about 13,000 beds less than what it would have otherwise have if the market was open and 3 competition was allowed. The evidence so far in these studies seems to point out that the 2 major goals of these activities to control cost and to allow the less fortunate to have access to facilities have not been accounted. And in fact, if you notice, most of the governors recently have ran away real quick from the certificate of needs in order to try to expand the hospital capabilities. The second issue that has to do with hospital beds being available has to do with a bed capacity. And I can attest, as being a practicing physician, that I practiced during the last 20 years in probably about 5 major academic medical centers. And we receive probably every 3 or 4 months an email, usually from the chief of surgery, saying, the hospital is full. If we don't discharge patients, we're not going to be able to do surgeries tomorrow because we don't have a place to put the patients. So hospitals run most of the times almost at full capacity. As a matter of fact, economic analysis have been shown that in the ideal range for occupancy rate is about 80 to 90%. If you stay within that range, you are going to be just spot on when it comes to the way the hospital's financials are run. If you go over 90%, and I gave you an example a few minutes ago, you run into the risk that you have to send patients to other facilities, to other hospitals, or you're not going to be able to perform certain procedures that otherwise you will like. And if you go below 70%, there is a reason for concern because the hospitals are going to lose money. As a matter of fact, certain states like California, a few years ago, penalized the hospitals so they were running below 70% of occupancy rate, and actually took away Medicare and Medicaid money from the hospital because they were basically an example of how they were losing money by running too low. So this, if we look at the American Hospital Association survey in 2015, the same problem is true for ICU beds. And, we know how ICU beds has been so important during the last couple of months. The U.S. has about 100,000 ICU beds with about a 70% occupancy rate. And this data is not really entirely, verified and validated. Some people think that the occupancy rate of 70% is low. So if you look at one of the reasons why ICU beds are so few and far between is because they are very expensive. Between 2000 and 2010, the cost for critical care medicine increased 92%, and it went to $56 billion to $100 billion. If you look at the cost in 2010 of critical care medicine, the numbers are really amazing. This cost is about 13% of hospital cost, 4.1% of the national health expenditure overall, and 0.7% of GDP. So, again, the situation works well if we are under normal circumstances. When something like a pandemic occurs, we are not prepared when it comes to hospital beds, and we have seen, the results actually by watching the news every night. So if you look, for example, this is actually an interesting slide because it compares us to other countries. We still despite what I just said, we're still doing fairly well when we compare ourselves to some other countries. We have 34 ICU beds for 100,000 patients, and the only country that gets close to us is Germany with about 30. Interestingly, New York is actually below Germany. It has about 24 beds. And why is that? It's simply because the certificate of need that I described before has not really kept up very well with the change in demographics and the change in population. So New York obviously has grown dramatically during the last few years, but it hasn't kept up with the need. More population needs more beds, and that has really not been, respected by and observed by the state regulators. Now, if you look at the bottom and you look at the United Kingdom and India in particular, you can understand how devastating could be a pandemic when, a pandemic is going to come to countries that are less developed than we are. So I would like to conclude my, part of the presentation, just giving you some factors of where I think we can make some changes. For example, the size and demographic characteristics of the population. I just mentioned that if a state or a larger geographical area like the large New York metro area, the amount of population living in that area should be considered and reflected into the certificate of needs and the need for hospital beds. And, the same thing that going down the list is the number of physicians, and in particular the number of nurses. As you noticed probably by the news of the last few days, it is easy to ask the military, for example, to come in and build a few hospitals as an emergency situation. But after that, you have to staff them. And there are not enough nurses to go around, particularly for critical care, where patients most of the time has a one-to-one nurse-to-patient ratio. And so that's something that needs to be kept in consideration. Obviously, the extent of the population insurance coverage is also very important. Sometimes, as been shown by some studies, that building a new hospital or expanding an existing hospital at the periphery of a state, maybe far away from large metro areas. I work in Massachusetts, and there are areas in Massachusetts where hospital could be increased in size without really necessarily impact the cost too much because they are away from large areas of population. But fundamentally, I think what hospitals and state governments have to do is to look at the geographic areas of market and carefully consider expanding certain service lines. For example, the U.S. does not have hospitals dedicated only to infectious diseases, and that's probably is something that we should look into. Finally, real quick, how do we respond to the current situation? Thankfully, the models that were proposed along the way, they were wrong, and significantly wrong. And so this horrible forecast of hundreds of thousands of people dying and the need for thousands and thousands of ventilators turned out not to be true, and that certainly was a strike of luck. Hospitals stopped procedures that they were elective. In my hospital, we don't do any surgery at this point unless it's an emergency. And that freed ICU beds and personnel. And at the same time, by not doing surgery anymore, ventilators that normally are used in the operating rooms have been converted for ICU use. And that conversion actually is not very complicated and can be done. We relied one more time on the U.S. military that built hospitals, deploy medical personnel, moved ships around, and that was pretty impressive to watch. And finally, I have to mention something that, having worked at NIID for a long time, the effort between public and private sector has been very interesting for me to watch. The idea that we were able to go from sequencing the genome of this virus in the middle of January to have a vaccine in clinical trial phase 1 in 60 days is really something that I don't think anybody has ever watched. And I mean, from a scientific standpoint, for me, was quite interesting to watch. Last thought: we experienced a pandemic with H1N1 in 2009. There were 16,000 people who died in the United States because of that. And after that, we did not make too many of the necessary changes, and we found ourselves again not prepared, for this one here. So hopefully, it will be interesting to see if changes will be done at this point. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to pass the floor to Doug, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Giacomo. That was great and thought-provoking. Just a quick reminder that feel free to type in any questions if you'd like to ask Giacomo or any of our other presenters a question at the end of the presentation. And we'll leave it for Doug Jones, VP of Sales at WellAir. Doug?
Thank you, Kenny. My name is Doug Jones. I am the Vice President of U.S. Channel Sales at WellAir. I've been in the industry for about 27 years, working for small startup companies all the way to $2 billion multi-division companies. My focus has been towards the sales and national accounts contracts. So I've seen quite a bit, and this is fairly remarkable what we're going through now. And when I was asked to come here to present, the one thing we wanted to talk about was the current PPE ventilator shortage. How did we get here? It's kind of a perfect storm. However, it's been brewing for a while. The one thing we need to remember is that healthcare is a business. I know Dr. Basadonna got into healthcare originally, not because of business, because of taking care of patients. But at the end of the day, healthcare is a business. And the hospitals are closing at an alarming rate. They're merging. The mergers and acquisition within healthcare is very, very large. IDNs are merging with one another for strategic partnerships to try to stay afloat. The reimbursement model is changing annually, and that dampens their financial stability as well. And they've also realized, these hospitals, that keeping inventory costs money, and that's very important to know, because hospitals now, and have for the last 20 plus years, have relied on prime vendors, distributors, really to carry their inventory load. And the inventory is shipped to hospitals for the IDNs almost on a daily basis, sometimes 3 shipments a day. They understand what the hospital utilizes, and they order from the manufacturers the hospitals utilize. So the issue is, if there's a chink in the armor, it can really throw the supply chain in disarray. Currently, PPE manufacturers have been making products as they always have, been very consistent. So the issue is really on the demand. Demand, obviously. The poor follow-through and preparation for this, and really the focus on dollars, the business side, is really what I see as one of the major causes for this. Again, the reduced inventory and utilizing the inventory, the product, has been quite a bit of a challenge. The hospitals have reaped the rewards from saving money because the inventory costs money. However, it certainly has not allowed them to stockpile inventory for situations like we have right now. I received this slide from John Pritchard from the Source Moving Media, and it's pretty apropos. It shows a traditional healthcare model and the complexities of it. I'm not going to go through each, but this shows the manufacturers, distributor, the hospital, as well as the GPO and their relationship. If you want to make it even a little bit more complicated, this does not have the integrated delivery networks or the ACO model. But you can see there's a lot of coordination that goes on here. And if there's a breakdown, that it's going to throw it into complete disarray. If the manufacturer has a back order, it will magnify that much. Every day you're in back, you're building up more and more orders. So it's been a kind of a perfect storm building up until now. This is just going to rehash the current, or I should say, the current model as of 4 months ago. What it has been before COVID-19. Purchasing has been pretty much the lead in any products, where in the past, physicians have had a lot of say in what they purchase. Purchasing is much more powerful, and they're in control, and they police the process completely. There has been a move a few years ago going away from a volume-based reimbursement model to a value-based reimbursement model. And part of this is having the centralized purchasing police it. So there's been a push going towards standardization. There's been a drive to have one manufacturer, again, coming back to the dollar sense, that the dollars will be saved if you go with one manufacturer. You'll get a much better price. Each salesperson, when they go to a hospital, has to go through a credentialing process. Again, a way to monitor how many people come through the doors, what they're saying, who they're talking to. Value analysis committees are really the normal now. Every new product that comes into the hospital has to go through a value analysis committee spearheaded by purchasing. If a doctor wants a product, he may have to make a presentation to the value analysis committee. The bottom line is hospitals have been standardizing in the last several years. So where in the past they may have 3-4 manufacturers selling PPE equipment, they've standardized to one to get the best possible price. However, the situation there is if there's a back order, if that supplier cannot manufacture that product, it becomes a challenge. And that's really what we're seeing now. In terms of the reimbursement model I mentioned on the prior slide, there has been a change where the insurance companies are holding 4% back from the reimbursement, and the hospitals or IDNs have to achieve a readmission goal as well as a patient experience or HAI reduction. And if they satisfy those goals, they'll get that 4% back. So obviously there's a big push. Portion of that is dollars spent and outcomes. So that's part of the equation with this. And again, as I mentioned in the last slide, the reduced inventory is now in the distributor's responsibility. In terms of where we are right now, and this is moving, this is certainly going to be a moving target because as it starts to reduce the number of COVID-19 cases, things will start to free up as it happens. Right now, though, it's completely focused on COVID-19. The hospital will not speak to you unless you have a product that addresses the COVID-19. If it's a product that they've been using in the past, it will be continual business as it's always done. They'll put the POs through, but they will not look to bring any new product on. So the products are focused on now are really the PPE, ventilators, surface infection, and airborne infection control units. We've seen that most of the purchasing departments have a skeleton crew in their office. Most of them are working remotely. They do have a few working there just to make sure there's someone manning the ship. Sales representatives are pretty much banned from the hospitals unless they're considered essential. Equipment repairers representatives are allowed there because they need to have the equipment operating properly. And in terms of purchasing, the capital expenditures are frozen in most of the hospitals right now until this is resolved. And in regards to the 2020 capital budget, the future will determine that. It's really open now in terms of what's going to happen. That brings me up to the next topic, is the GPOs. What is their role? The group purchasing organizations' role has changed quite a bit over the last 25 years. They tend to change the market. They started off initially as purely a contracting price tool that their members could utilize. They have since switched to an analytical type of business, and now they're really trying to stand out for their members. They're looking for their members' best interests, and they're focused primarily on managing the inventory level of the PPEs. If they have members that have excessive amounts, they're trying to shuffle a product back and forth. And they've also identified and tried to identify new technologies that will address the COVID-19 products. Obviously, it's been pushed out further by the government, but they've also had a hand in that as well. So all daily business business activities with the GPOs is closing. The RFP process is closed. They're not seeing any vendors in terms of business because, and also their annual meetings have been canceled as well here. They continue to focus, as the government is, on hotspots. The New York City, the Northeast has been a big emphasis for the GPOs. There will be a push down to Philadelphia, Detroit, Louisiana as those hotspots become prevalent, as it's been announced. The government actions, this is a very brief synopsis. There's a lot more going on. Leading up to this, the FDA in January put a call out to medication and medical device companies in terms of testing kits and vaccines. They wanted to find out if there were any products that were available that they could possibly do the FDA fast track. And on top of that, states have taken upon themselves to reach out to small startup technologies to see if they could push it forward. And the recipient of this has been many of the mask companies have come around, and they're making a big impact in supplying products as well. The COVID-19 stimulus package was announced several weeks ago. $15.85 billion of that is going to the VA, and a good portion of that will be towards the national crisis, which is set aside for COVID-related products. So hospitals can buy product right now, and they don't have to put in for a capital budget if it's a capital product. Obviously, we've seen on the news, there's been a lot of collaboration with businesses to solve this issue. It's been all hands on deck. You never thought you'd see the day where you have two competing companies sitting at the same table trying to come up with a resolution in terms of a problem like COVID-19. So it's been eye-opening to see that. It's also nice to see companies like Tesla reaching out to develop some ventilators to assist in the ventilator shortage as well. And also, I wanted to point out the national stockpile focus. Most of us really were not aware of this. It started back in 1999, but it was originally intended for bioterrorism. It's only been used really after 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, H1N1 in 2009, Ebola in 2014, and Zika. So this is the next in line. They plan to have 500 million respirators or the masks in 18 months. That obviously doesn't satisfy the short term. After the last use of the stockpile, you really need to question how much stockpile was built up. As of 2 weeks ago, there have been 16,660 ventilators in the stockpile. And the stockpile is located at various warehouses around the country. One thing of note, it's undisclosed how many respirators. The fact that it's been undisclosed tells me it's very low. So obviously the mask is the big issue that we're trying to correct now. The allocation for the stockpile is really based on the state size, the population, and also the need. If it's a hot spot, obviously they would take precedence over it. So in closing, really what happens next? This is time will tell. But one thing I guarantee is there will be changes in the daily business that we do every day. The hospital environment will change just as it did after 9/11. There will be changes in directive and how business is done, as well as policy at the hospital as well. And the one thing we all need to focus on, if you're a manufacturer, is we need to be flexible. There'll be additional product demands, criteria that we have to satisfy, and the market, as we know, will be changing as well. And only time will tell exactly how they will be changing, but we'll get through this. With that being said, I will pass this off to Mary, who'll go over the regulatory impact.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Good morning and good afternoon. I hope everybody and their families and friends are safe and healthy during this crisis. This is Mary McNamara-Cullinane. I'm the Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at Alira Health. I've been in regulatory affairs for over 25 years, working in consulting, large medical device companies, and several startups. This morning, I'm just going to touch a bit on the FDA's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as manufacturers trying to get their products to market in an expedited fashion, and then some tips on working with the FDA to achieve emergency use authorization on getting these products to market. So the healthcare community is coming together, including our clients and the FDA under Health and Human Services, to expedite the manufacture and approval of devices, drugs, and other technologies to address the COVID-19 pandemic. The FDA under Health and Human Services declared a public health emergency on February 4th, 2020, approximately 5 weeks prior to the federal government declaring this a public health emergency. So using that time, they were able to release several guidance documents as well as regulations surrounding the emergency use authorization process to try to get ahead of the fast spread of COVID-19. They worked very quickly in early to mid-February to release several of these guidance documents and emergency use processes to the life science community. The emergency use authorization is a mechanism to increase availability of devices to treat COVID-19. FDA is principally using two mechanisms to permit the rapid manufacture and distribution of devices in response to COVID-19. The first is they're exercising what's called an enforcement discretion through immediately in effect guidance documents. What that means is if a company complies with the information in that guidance, as well as testing and labeling set forth, those products can immediately go to market without FDA intervention or approval. Some examples of these types of guidance documents cover ventilators, face masks, respirators, high-level disinfectants, sterilants, COVID-19 diagnostics, patient monitoring systems, thermometers, and then the most recent infusion pumps and accessories. So that's the first mechanism FDA has used to address the pandemic. The second is the emergency use authorization, which is essentially a submission process to FDA to commercialize unapproved medical products to get them on the market as fast as possible. What has to go into an emergency use authorization submission are similar information to what's required in other submissions. Information about the product, the intended use, device description, any testing to support safety and efficacy, as well as why the product, the device, or the technology is appropriate for use during this pandemic. So companies have to demonstrate the need for this type of technology to address COVID-19. FDA is making the review of these documents a priority over other submission types. So a couple of items that are things that have occurred in the last couple of days from the FDA to address the pandemic is they recently issued an emergency use authorization for a blood purification system to treat patients that have COVID. They also issued an emergency use authorization to systems that can decontaminate compatible N95 or N95 equivalent respirators. Up to date, there have been 33 emergency use authorizations for diagnostic tests to test for COVID-19. FDA is working with about 300 test developers to develop tests for these diagnostic tests. So what our clients are doing and how we're assisting them to address the COVID-19 pandemic is they're using several of the tools that FDA has provided, a couple that I just talked about. But another is that FDA does have a 24/7 hotline. So anybody can call FDA with concerns or questions to see if their technology, device, or pharmaceutical would be appropriate to go through the emergency use authorization or to expedite commercialization through those guidance documents I referred to a few minutes ago. How companies can prepare to do this would be to, again, gather the technological and medical device information for FDA to understand how that's going to address the pandemic. We have to understand the appropriateness of that technology as to be part of the emergency use authorization, and then follow the requirements that FDA has laid out to complete the emergency use authorization. A couple of elements that are required for emergency use that are not typically required during the traditional submission process with FDA is FDA does want companies to indicate the inventory they have on hand or will have in the short term, say for the next 2 to 4 months. They want to make sure companies have some product on hand prior to reviewing an emergency use authorization. And then the second item is FDA wants companies to provide in the emergency use authorization 2 fact sheets. And those fact sheets are addressed to both the user, the healthcare practitioner, as well as the patient. And what those fact sheets do is they inform those 2 parties that this product is only being used during the emergency use, what the product does, how it accomplishes its function, and what the risks and benefits are of this product or technology that's gone through under the emergency use authorization. So those are 2 elements that are required for completion of an emergency use authorization submission to the FDA. So I would say FDA has been more than proactive to address this public health emergency. Every single day, FDA is releasing publicly emails, communications, and webinars on their new guidance documents, press releases, webinars to inform the public and healthcare companies how to go about and apply for these emergency use authorizations. And they are making all of these submissions a priority, the diagnostic systems and any other technologies that are appropriate for addressing and assisting in the COVID-19 pandemic. And then lastly, Alira Health can assist companies in navigating the process. We're competent in understanding the FDA requirements as well as other regulations surrounding the various types of devices and technologies. So please reach out if you have any questions at all or believe you may have technology to help in the COVID-19 pandemic efforts. I think that's all that I have, and I'll pass this back over to Kenny to see if we have any questions. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mary, and thank you, everyone. I do have a couple of quick questions. And again, anyone who in the chat, feel free to type in any as we go. But just quickly, Mary, while the FDA is fresh on our minds, do you see the FDA? I mean, it sounds like first that they've actually been doing a great job and proactive in helping things move along. But do you see either of those processes you discussed becoming more permanent instead of something that is sort of enacted when needed? And will that become a little more fluid for an emergent need, maybe not as big as a global pandemic, but something that is sort of in between that would allow for a faster submission?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, so how FDA has positioned this is that these companies in those fact sheets that I referred to, they have to tell the user and the healthcare practitioner that the use of this product will be terminated as soon as this public health emergency has been declared over by Health and Human Services.
Okay.
So for that purpose, it will end. Now, when it will end right now, I mean, this could be several months that these companies have products on the market. I mean, we might be at the top of the curve now or leveling off, but several states are behind us. So these products could stay on the market potentially for a year. Now, having said that, to answer your other part of your question, there may be some new regulations or guidances from FDA to address in the short term pandemics like this, but that has yet to be determined. They're working overtime right now to address this one.
Great, thank you. And Giacomo, you talked about sort of having the militaries and federal response in temporary hospitals, also the challenges with staffing them. Do you see, related to my question to Mary, do you see the industry adjusting to make those more available? Will there be maybe private companies that specialize in that kind of emergent setup becoming more popular? Is there going to be more of a government response or a combination? How do you see that changing, if at all, as a result of this experience?
Well, I think it's still early to understand how is this going to change the way we do things. If you look overall, the fact that the military moved an incredibly large ship from San Diego to LA, and currently the ship has 21 patients on it, and I think they can house more than 1,000. So one will look at this and say, well, maybe that was not necessary at that point. I think that people will look more out to the possibility to use existing facilities and look how the military converted certain facilities so quickly into a structure where patients can be housed and taken care of. You know, the Javits Center experience was quite, you know, usually there are car shows there, and now,
Right.
you know, they have patients. And so I think that, you know, we probably should learn from that and adapt that way of response to, because there are facilities that are not used. There are hospitals that they are standing but empty nowadays, almost in every state. And so we need to learn how can we convert them rapidly. God forbid something like this happens again.
Great, thank you. We have a couple of questions in the chat coming up here. This might be a combination, either Giacomo or Doug question, but are we seeing changes within regulation for trade agreements with China and other countries? As you read here.
I think I'm going to give this to Doug.
Okay.
It's really a loaded question. I don't have the answer to that, and I don't think outside of Washington, D.C., many people really have what's in the works. I think they're trying to get through the immediate situation here, and then they're going to look at how they can prevent this from happening moving forward. I don't think anybody really has an answer if there's anything in the works in terms of regulatory trade agreements.
Thank you. And then Mary, I know that we've seen a little bit of this internally lately. Would you like to comment on the use of sterile water and emergency use authorizations?
Oh, interesting. I am actually in the middle of doing an emergency use authorization for sterile water as we speak. So they can be an emergency use authorization process. There's nothing that is prohibited as long as that kind of a product would be appropriate for use to address the COVID-19 pandemic. So sterile water, which is used in ventilators, as far as I know, I mean, I'm in the middle of doing one of those emergency use authorizations, and I bet there are several more. And I'm also involved with several accessory type products that work with other devices to address the COVID-19 pandemic. So the emergency use authorization does cover not just devices or technology that directly interfaces with the patient to address their issues associated with COVID. Any accessory would also be appropriate for the EUA.
Excellent, thank you. I believe that's all we had for questions. So I just want to again thank our presenters and everyone who attended for joining. Feel free to reach out to me at Alira Health at any time if you'd like to speak with our presenters. Happy to introduce you. Mary mentioned a little bit about Alira Health, but we're a lifecycle consulting firm providing product development, regulatory, clinical, market access, strategy consulting, and M&A services. So running the whole gambit. Happy to speak to you about any of those or make an introduction to Doug Jones or other presenters. Again, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. I know it's a strange time, so appreciate it, and stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenny.
Thanks, Kenny.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.